The 10,210th meeting of the Security Council is resumed. I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 5 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. The flashing light on the microphone will prompt speakers to bring their remarks to a close after 5 minutes. I now give the floor to the representative of Nigeria.
Mr. President, Nigeria thanks Denmark and Mrs. Candia Thompson for her briefing this morning. The Security Council working methods are not a procedural side issue. They determine whether the Council that decides for all member states is one that most member states can actually see, engage with, and trust. Nigeria has sat on the Council and speaks to 3 problems from our experience, each with a specific recommendation. First, on the selection of chairs and vice chairs of subsidiary bodies. The deadlock affecting the current package is no longer an isolated procedural hiccup. It is a recurring challenge that leaves sanctions committee and working groups without leadership for months at a time. Nigeria proposes that paragraphs 124 to 129 of Note S/2024/507 be modified to include a default mechanism, one that allows outstanding positions to be filled by rotation among eligible candidates from the relevant regional group on an interim basis, where consensus on the package is not reached within 60 days of the start of the Council's year. A subsidiary body should not go without leadership because a wider membership cannot agree on a package deal that has nothing to do with the mandate of that body. Second, on Rule 37 and Rule 39, in practice, participation by specially affected states still depends on case-by-case accommodation rather than clear entitlement. Nigeria proposes that the Council adopt defined criteria under which a state qualifies as specially affected, including states named in the resolution under discussion, neighboring states to an active conflict, and troop and police contributing countries to relevant mission, and that participation under Rule 37 be presumptive once those criteria are met, rather than a matter of individual request and Council's discretion. Third, on pen holding, African situations continue to occupy a large share of the Council's agenda, yet co-pen holding arrangements involving African member states remain ad hoc rather than standard practice. Nigeria proposes that co-pen holding with the elected African members on African file items becomes the default arrangement, not the exception. It is imperative also to publish an annual accounting of pen holder assignments across the agenda so that the distribution is visible and can be assessed rather than assumed. On the broader question of Council reform, Nigeria reiterates that meaningful progress requires the IGN process to move from repetition of position papers to a text-based process anchored on a single negotiating text. Nigeria also reaffirms the common African position as set out in the Ezulwini Consensus and Set Declaration. Mr. President, each annual open debate on the Council's working method produces recommendations that may not be tracked until the next one. Nigeria proposes that the Council adopts a practice that allows it to track the status of proposal raised in these debates, including this one, so that progress or lack of it is visible year to year. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Nigeria for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Angola.
Mr. President, we thank Denmark and Pakistan for convening this timely open debate, and Ms. Shamala Thompson for her valuable insights presented. At a time of deepening geopolitical divisions, expanding conflicts and mounting pressure on multilateral cooperation, improving the working methods of the Security Council is not merely a procedural matter. It's essential to strengthening the Council's effectiveness, credibility, legitimacy, and capacity for timely action in discharging its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Angola considers that the continued implementation of Note S/2024/507 should be anchored in transparency, inclusivity, efficiency, accountability, and predictability, while preserving the intergovernmental character of the United Nations and the sovereign equality of all member states. In this regard, we wish to underscore 4 priorities. First, broad and meaningful participation in the Council's work. States directly affected by situations on the Council's agenda should be afforded appropriate opportunities to contribute to its deliberations. Rule 37 and 39 should be applied in a fair, consistent, and transparent manner, enable the Council to draw more effectively a national perspective, regional knowledge, and relevant expertise. Such participation should contribute substantially to decision-making and to the search of sustainable solutions. Second, promote a more equitable distribution of responsibilities within the Council. Angola supports greater participation of elected members in pen-holdship and co-pen-holdship arrangements. Regional knowledge and the proximity to situations under consideration should be recognized as a strategic asset in the preparation of Council's outcomes, the building of consensus, and the implementation of decisions. Third, ensure the timely and predictable functioning of subsidiary bodies. Prolonged delays in the appointment of chairs and vice chair risk undermining continuity and institutional effectiveness. The Council should establish practical contingency arrangements and strengthen the transparency, predictability, and timeliness of the selection process. Institutional responsibility should not be paralyzed by political disagreement. Fourth, strengthen coherence across the United Nations system. Cooperation between the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the Peace-Building Commission and other relevant United Nations bodies should be deepened, particularly in areas of conflict prevention, mediation, peace-building, and sustaining peace. Improved coordination can reduce fragmentation, promote complementarity, and enable earlier and more effective collective action. Mr. President, ORCID methods should serve as an instrument for building trust, bridging differences, and facilitating action. They should create greater space for dialogue, preventive diplomacy, early engagement, and consensus building, rather than reproducing existing divisions. Angola therefore encouraged the informal working group on documentation and other procedural questions to translate the proposals emerging from this debate into concrete recommendations, realistic timelines, and a measurable improvement to strengthen the follow-up of their implementation. Ultimately, a Security Council that is more transparent, inclusive, representative in its practices, and responsive in its decision-making will be better equipped to act effectively on behalf of the wider membership and to uphold the purposes and the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Angola for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Maldives.
Thank you, President. A council entrusted to act on behalf of all member states must also work in a way that earns their confidence. Its working methods determine who helps shape decisions, whose voices are heard, and whether disagreements can be managed through diplomacy rather than harden into paralysis. For the Maldives, this is a question of equality. Small island developing states do not have a permanent access to this table. We depend on procedures that make access predictable, participation meaningful, and influence possible through arguments rather than power. Let me make 5 points. First, the Council must fix the appointment of subsidiary body chairs. Note 507 sets 1st of October as the target for provisional agreement, but that deadline has never been met. The Council should stop treating every appointment as one indivisible package. Uncontested chairs should proceed. Disputed appointments should be negotiated separately. The Council should strengthen the contingency arrangements in paragraph 129 to address deadlocks extending beyond January, while ensuring that prolonged negotiations or appointments do not impede the substantive work of the subsidiary bodies. Second, the Council should democratize the pen. Note 507 already provides that any Council member may serve as penholder or co-penholder. Yet, penholdership or co-penholdership on most files is concentrated among a few. One country situation, co-penholdership should move more systematically and include elected members with regional knowledge or direct contribution to those issues. Penholders should consult affected states before circulating a first draft and indicate at the first negotiations whose views were sought. Earlier consultation can reduce disagreements and produce stronger mandates. Third, participation must be governed by clearer standards. Requests under Rule 37 from states directly concerned or specially affected should be a matter of practice to be accommodated. Where participation is not permitted, the Council should provide a clear procedural explanation. Rule 39 briefers should be selected on the basis of expertise, relevance to the contribution they make, and the Council's deliberations. Fourth, the Council should create a more space for diplomacy before positions become harder. From 2016 to 2025, 49 vetoes were cast, compared with 19 in the preceding decade. Working methods, of course, cannot solve every geopolitical divide. But earlier dialogues, including with affected states and relevant regional organizations, can identify possible convergences before a text becomes a test of political alignment. And fifth and finally, the Secretary General selection should preserve the transparency already created through public nominations, vision statements, financial disclosures, and the General Assembly dialogue. The Council should publish a procedural roadmap for its phase in maintaining regular communication with the President of the General Assembly and report progress without compromising the required confidentiality. Better working methods will not solve political differences, of course. They can, however, prevent procedure from deepening them. A Council that acts on behalf of all Member States must therefore work in a way that gives Member States reason to trust the decisions taken on their name. Thank you.
Representative of the Maldives for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Libya.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks for arranging this meeting. I also wish to thank Ms. Shamala Thompson on her previous briefing. Take the opportunity also to thank SCAD for all their services and oversight on applying these working methods as they stand today. I have 4 specific points that I wish to share, but they are mainly concerning, from our experience, countries which are on the agenda under Chapter 7, and ways of improvement in terms of how these countries engage with the Council. And these points that I'm raising today is not the first time we have been discussing this, but I do hope this time we can have practical steps in order to take them into consideration. And when I speak today on behalf of Libya, but I assure you to share this matter that is shared or is concerned with many African countries and the African group in particular, knowing that most of the 75% of cases under Chapter 7 come from the African region. My first point, and these points I'll give you or share what they are and also propose solutions. The issue of course, we're talking about the selection of penholder and co-penholder. I know it was said many times, but I think in practical terms, it is fair enough to say that today, at least a co-penholder should be from the region of the country of concern. This could be something standardized. It could be it's not something impossible. We can, if it's hard to change the main penholder today, but at least introducing a co-penholder from the region of the country of concern is not something that is hard, nor it is against any rules or regulations or existing working methods. And this, of course, facilitates a lot of the matter, and it also voices out the concerns of the country coming from our region. Of course, it goes to other regions as well. The second point is regarding the method on drafting resolutions or drafting PRSTs. Today, the method that is applied is that the penholder would circulate a draft among the 15 members, and deliberations start, negotiation starts, but the country of concern is not engaged in that process in a systematic manner. It only gets engaged by its bilateral relation with one of the members or the representative of the region in the council, but at the end of the day, none of the 15 members is mandated to share that draft, nor our inputs or comments that are shared with that country is necessarily raised in the manner we wish to have. We see that it is fair and just to listen to the country of concern, to take their inputs officially on record, and then it's among the 15 members to discuss it and to take it or not. But the fact that today I'm under the mercy of sharing information with a member in the council to take it or not, to choose what to present to others or not, and it's not even presented as the case by the name of the country, it could be on behalf of the country that is presenting this. I think this is not fair, and it doesn't show what's going on. This goes also with drafting PRSTs. It's the same way. We need to be engaged. The solution for this is simple, that the chair can, as circulating or the pen holder circulating this to the 15 members, can also share one copy with the country of concern. And then whatever inputs the country puts can be either taken into consideration or not, but for the record, at least you have the point of view of the concerned country. Same thing now on the issue of sanctions committee and panel of experts. And here we talk about the reports. The same method happens, that we get very late to know about the report when it's being drafted, and our inputs is given in a late stage where it will be very hard for others to take that into consideration, where in many cases there might be technical mistakes even in the report, not necessarily substantive, but not giving us the chance to be able to engage in early stages with the panel of expert reports is also not helping the process, and for the sake of transparency, this should be into consideration. There's many times that after the report has been produced, we have been proving that there were technical mistakes, and again, I'm not talking about the analysis and substantive issues, but then it was too late even to recall or recover. Now, talking about the panel of experts or the sanctions committee, there's another challenge that happens when there is any request or any submission coming from another country regarding the country of concern to ask for example, of any exemption from licenses or something like that. Again, we don't get notified officially as a country that there is a third party who is asking something specifically that is regarded to us. I'll give you a concrete example. We have under sanctions the Libyan Investment Authority, and there's so many times where countries ask for exemptions to use these assets for whatever reason, and it goes through the council members. Our chair of the committee, of the sanctions committee, would share this with us, but it's not systematic. It's not something mandated. It's because of our good relation with this country, they will share it with us. But it has to be systematic and mandated. It goes like the drafting of resolutions and PRSTs. It should be that whenever a request is submitted to the council regarding a country of concern, it is the chair of the committee who needs to notify officially the country and tell them this country is asking something and what is your opinion about it. And then it's the council's decision to take it or not. My last point is regarding the closed consultations. In some cases, it's particularly when there is no open session on a briefing regarding a country, there's a closed consultation. We see that it is the right of the country to attend at least part of this meeting in the beginning, to have this frank discussion with the council members, other than the official statements, and then this country can leave for the rest for their debate. But today it only happens by invitation if requested by the members. We still see that these things should be systematic. In summary, the points I mentioned is something that I think we can enhance our working methods. It's not against anything to do with our charter, nor about the council, and it's even improving transparency and just for the countries. Today, I'm sure colleagues from Somalia and DRC, they are blessed to be on the council today, but they're both on Chapter 7 for different other reasons, but they have the privilege of being able to see what's going on and circulated in their regard. But I don't have to be a council member to be able to see these things and to be part of it. I have the right, when something is being drafted for my country, that I can actually give my input and know which country is actually amending something or requesting an edit on something to do with a final resolution. Because then I can go bilaterally with that country and discuss and debate and negotiate and maybe change or persuade for something to happen. So sorry to be long, but these are practical points. I do hope that we can have practical also steps to take them into consideration. And thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Libya for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Thailand.
President, I would like to start by commending Denmark for convening this very important open debate. We certainly welcome the progress made under Presidential Note S 2024-507. The persistent efforts of the informal working group on documentation and other procedural questions have successfully enhanced the Council's operational transparency and its engagement with the broader UN membership. And to further improve working methods of the Council, my delegation wishes to share perhaps 5 key observations. First of all, the Council should institutionalize timely dialogue with the wider membership. Early consultations with affected states under Rules 37 and 39 are not merely procedural, but very vital for achieving sustainable outcomes on country-specific files. Such engagement can lead to more inclusive and sustainable solutions, improve the Council's credibility, and ensure that its agenda is effectively shaped and implemented. Second, stronger synergy between the Council and other principal UN bodies, including the General Assembly, ECOSOC, and the Peacebuilding Commission, as well as between UN entities and regional organizations, is of course essential to building sustainable peace and security. We must replace silos with greater complementarity and effective coordination. Thirdly, Thailand remains deeply concerned by the unprecedented deadlock in appointing chairs for subsidiary bodies. To prevent procedural delays and to alleviate pressure on the presidency, we suggest exploring rotational arrangements to achieve a balanced, timely, and fair distribution of chairmanships. And fourth, Thailand advocates for a more inclusive penholdership system. Expanding co-pen holding opportunities to elected members, particularly from developing countries, will ensure fair burden sharing and inject diverse regional perspectives into outcome documents. And lastly, the Secretary General's election must prioritize transparency and inclusivity. In line with Article 97, we encourage the Council to consider presenting multiple well-qualified candidates to the General Assembly, including for the 2026 selection process, to ensure a truly democratic choice. President, amid deep geopolitical divisions, a more effective, transparent, and inclusive Council is paramount to restoring trust in multilateral system. And Thailand remains fully committed to supporting these vital procedural reforms. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Thailand for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President. The reform of the international security pillar of the
y una transformación de largo aliento de los métodos de trabajo del Consejo de Seguridad.
Of the methods of work of this council. In addition to the fact that we still don't have a
Es una cuestión menor para superar la ineficiencia, la inacción e incluso la
inaction and even the obstruction of the current process of adopting decisions. The inability to act in the face of emerging grave humanitarian crises that lead to thousands of civilians, including women, children, continuing to pay the highest price, even when this main organ of the organization, no longer responds in a timely way to the threats to international peace and security. Mexico, together with France, has promoted the so-called
en atrocidades en masa. Actualmente, 122 estados han suscrito esta iniciativa, reflejo de un acuerdo cada vez más generalizado en favor de un Consejo que responda con celeridad y responsabilidad ante las crisis humanitarias. Reconocemos a Jamaica, Surinam, Belice y San Cristóbal y Nieves.
Suriname, Belize, for having recently joined this collective effort, and we call on others to do so.
Mi país ha subrayado la importancia de la aplicación del artículo 27.3 de la Carta. Los Estados parte en una controversia deben abstenerse de votar como principio de
Parties to a dispute should refrain from voting as a principle of impartiality and independence in the decision-making of the Council. And with this in mind, we support the initiative promoted by Liechtenstein to ensure the full validity of this obligation, and we urge member states to support it. Mr. President, democratizing the methods of work also means distributing in a more equitable way the responsibilities of this council. First of all, the opportunities for penholderships and co-penholderships should be expanded so that elected members, and in particular those with regional knowledge or direct experience of a particular dossier, should participate fully in elaborating the products of the council. Secondly, the lack of designation of chairs and vice chairs of subsidiary organs obstructs a smooth performance of their functions, in addition to being a practice in which permanent members exceed their authority vis-a-vis elected members. Mexico would echo the appeal formulated by the E10 to conclude the designations as soon as possible, thus respecting the agreement established in Note 507. Thirdly, my delegation underscores the importance for the informal group, working group on documentation and other procedural issues to fulfill its functions that have been entrusted to it, in particular in the face of the use of the right of legitimate defense envisioned in Article 51 of the Charter. In 2026, some 124 letters have been submitted by 17 states referring to Article 51, invoking or reserving the right of legitimate defense, with other
han sido objeto de acción o de examen de este Consejo. Reconociendo la importancia
led to its actions. We believe it's important to clarify the application and interpretation of Article 51.
llama la atención del Comité Especial de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y del fortalecimiento del papel de la organización.
Strengthening the role of the organization. The accessibility of these notifications is inadequate without sufficient institutional scrutiny and support, and without a mechanism to inform or notify of when Article 51 is invoked. With this in mind, Mexico considers that the annual report of the Council could contribute to strengthening transparency on handling of these communications by
31, e indicando cuáles fueron objeto de consideración en sesiones oficiales o dieron lugar a alguna actuación del Consejo. Ello permitiría, señor presidente, a la membresía conocer las notificaciones recibidas y el seguimiento institucional brindado. En cuarto lugar, señor presidente,
notifications received and the follow-up ensured. Fourthly, Mexico reiterates the importance of efforts to revitalize the General Assembly expressed in Resolution 79/327, especially as it strengthens coordination and complementarity between the organs of the United Nations, in particular between the Council and the General Assembly. A greater synergy between and of course a better communication between these two organs is essential to preserve
rendición de cuentas. La nota 507 requiere además que el informe anual del Consejo
requires that an annual report of the Security Council includes specific reports on the use of the veto, its effective Presentation in line with Article 24.3 of the Charter and in line with Resolution 79/327 is a way to ensure accountability. We welcome that the Security Council is listening to members on its methods of work and encourage it to ensure continuity to this debate on an annual basis. We trust that proposals that are formulated today will be taken seriously and there will be continuity. Lastly,
permitirá contar con un Consejo de Seguridad más transparente, inclusivo y responsable ante la
have a council that is more transparent, more inclusive, and more responsible to the membership of the organization and better prepared to respond to the complex challenges of international peace and security. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Mexico for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Mr. President, Israel welcomes the opportunity to discuss the Security Council's working methods. Today's concept note referenced Article 24 of the UN Charter. It gives this Council a clear responsibility, maintaining international peace and security. This brings me to a fundamental concern. This Council has become politicized and paralyzed by structural dysfunction. I say to the members of this Council, let's get back to basics. Remember your mission, because this Council has lost its way. The clearest example is emergency meetings. This Council has become very good at meeting and very bad at making a difference. An emergency meeting should respond to an immediate threat to international peace and security, not to a political dispute that a member state wants to place before the Council. But that is what we have seen in practice. Over the past 4 years, the Security Council has held roughly 100 meetings focused on Israel. At least 17 of them were emergency meetings, far more than other countries in the region. This Council held an emergency meeting after Israel recognized Somaliland. Some countries outrageously claimed Israel would use that recognition to expel Palestinians from Gaza. That conspiracy theory was unfounded. 8 months later, it remains unfounded. Just last week, we met here. This Council held an emergency meeting on the escalation in the West Bank. It focused on the so-called settler violence, not the rise in Palestinian terrorist attack. These were not emergencies, just opportunities to bash Israel. At the same time, there were no emergency meetings when Jews were murdered in northern Israel or at a bus stop in Jerusalem. So I ask this Council, what are we doing here? How has it become so easy to request an emergency meeting? All a Council member needs to do is send a letter to the presidency asking for one. We have forgotten what a real emergency is. You should consider a simple change. Just raise the bar. An emergency meeting should require maybe 2, 3 Council members, not one to request it. Every request should meet the same 3 tests. Is there an immediate threat to international peace and security? Does it require urgent attention? And what is the Council expected to accomplish? That would help this Council distinguish genuine emergencies from political theater. Mr. President, Israel is not raising this issue simply because we are the subject of so many meetings. This is not only a problem of fairness. This lack of effectiveness has consequences. When the Council spends its time on political theater, it has less time to confront the threats actually driving instability in our region. Take a look at Iran and the network of terrorist proxies. Iran has spent years building and supporting terrorist groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen. They have attacked civilians, fueled conflicts, and undermined regional stability. But In the past 4 years, there have been less than 10 emergency meetings about Iran. Only 2 specifically about Hamas holding hostages, and only 1 about the Houthis attacking ships in the Red Sea. Look at Turkey. They emerged as the dominant Hamas hub, where Hamas coordinates terror attacks in Judea and Samaria. Not only that, Turkey occupies 5% of Syria today. You don't hear about that in the Security Council. So I ask this council, where is your condemnation of Turkey? Where is your designation of Iranian terrorist proxies? Mr. President, Israel wants this council to be a respected institution again. To do that, it must change its mindset. The success of the Security Council should not be measured by how many meetings it holds or how many statements it issues. It should be measured by whether its actions make a real difference. It should set basic goals it can achieve. Did violence decrease? Did terrorism become harder to carry out? Did the Council help prevent the next escalation? You know, the Council itself tracks efficiency. In 2025, this Council met for 685 hours. But what have those deliberations actually produced? The reality on the ground has not improved, unfortunately. Hamas has not disarmed in Gaza. Shipping is still threatened in the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, all while Iran continues to drive instability in the region. This is precisely why we should judge effectiveness on outcomes, not simply by the number of meetings. This Council can do more to address these threats by adopting 3 principles. First, look at the genuine threats. Emergency sessions should be used during real and immediate threats to international peace and security. Second, address causes, not only consequences. The Council should devote greater attention to the actors, networks, and patterns that drive repeated cycles of violence. And third, measure results. Every meeting should have a purpose, and the Council should be willing to ask whether that purpose was actually achieved. Mr. President, the Security Council was not created to count meetings. It was created to prevent wars. When this Council fails to focus on real security threats, we all pay a heavy price. Thank you.
Of Israel for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Mr. President, I thank Denmark and Pakistan for organizing this open debate. As we know, this Council is one of the UN's most visible face to the world, and work here tends to be judged by all our peoples. This makes its working methods a matter of collective interest. Brazil reaffirms its commitment to a more open, transparent, accountable, and inclusive Security Council. No effort should be spared in achieving the full implementation of Presidential Note 507, including the provisions concerning the selection of the chairs of subsidiary bodies. This process should be open, transparent, and timely, and should be based on broad consultations with the whole UN membership. An equitable distribution of responsibilities is one of the most effective ways to strengthen the Council's decision-making process. A fair allocation of penholderships, including co-penholderships, contributes to greater transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness. Permanent members account for around 3/4 of all penholderships today. While instances of co-penholdership have increased, this is still a markedly imbalanced arrangement. This imbalance exacerbates the Council's insufficient representativeness and therefore helps erode its legitimacy, given the significant role of penholders. Elected members must participate in negotiations from the earliest stages of the drafting process and assume greater responsibility in the preparation of Council products. a requirement that is undermined by current practice. When debating the Council's working methods, our main reference must always be the letter and the spirit of the Charter. In this regard, there is no contradiction between transparency and effectiveness. Since the Council acts on behalf of the entire membership, transparency and accountability are inherent elements of its functions. These principles must therefore guide all aspects of the Council's work, including one of its important responsibilities under the Charter, which is the recommendation of candidates to the General Assembly for appointment as Secretary General. Equally important is the inclusiveness of the Council's debates. Whenever appropriate, the Council should prioritize public meetings. The participation of civil society representatives in Council briefings, particularly women, should also be promoted as their perspectives enrich the understanding of complex issues and strengthen the legitimacy of the Council's decisions. The Security Council should also prioritize better coordination, cooperation, and interaction with the other main organs of the UN, while obviously paying due regard to their respective mandates. Substantive consultations among the principal organs can help prevent duplication of work and preserve the Assembly's central role. The Council should also make greater use of the valuable advice and political instruments provided for by the Peacebuilding Commission. It is uniquely positioned to enrich discussions on Council mandates and to offer cross-cutting perspectives and solutions on a wide range of issues, including preventive diplomacy. Lastly, only a comprehensive reform of the Security Council, including the expansion in both categories of membership, will make this body representative of contemporary geopolitical realities. Lack of reform leads to the Council's legitimacy and effectiveness being undermined every day. Developing countries remain underrepresented, and states from entire regions, such as Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa, continue to lack representation in the permanent category. Therefore, any discussion on the Council's working methods must be underpinned by the overarching framework of comprehensive reform. We renew our call for all member states to redouble their efforts to bring the Security Council into line with contemporary realities. I thank you.
Brazil for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
Mr. President, Vietnam thanks the presidency of Denmark and Pakistan for convening this timely open debate. We also thank Ms. Shamala Kandia Thompson for her insightful briefing. Mr. President, while the world is facing mounting challenges, geopolitical divisions and competition are increasingly constraining the Council's ability to respond effectively to global crises. There is a strong call from the broader UN membership for the Council to fulfill its primary responsibility under the Charter. Reviewing and improving its working methods is an urgent imperative to ensure that the Council remains effective, credible, and responsive. As an elected member of the Council in 2020 and 2021, Vietnam, together with the E10, advocated for greater inclusiveness, transparency, and broader engagement between the Councils and the wider membership. Drawing on our experience, and now from the perspective of a non-Council member, we wish to offer the following observations. First, procedural impasses can have real consequences for the Council's ability to function. The continued challenges in appointing chairs and vice chairs of subsidiary bodies are a case in point, particularly as many of these bodies are undergoing major review processes. Vietnam encourages Council members to make full use of the process set out in Note 507. This includes early consultation, transparency, inclusivity, and fair distribution of responsibilities. Where agreed timelines cannot be met, contingency arrangement could be considered to help ensure that failure to reach agreement does not result in institutional paralysis. Second, transparency should be accompanied by meaningful dialogue. Member states should have opportunities to understand processes, contribute views, and raise concerns before positions become entrenched. The Council should therefore make early consultations more systematic and meaningful through strengthening regular and interactive briefings for the wider membership where appropriate. The ongoing discussion on the selection of the next SG present an important opportunity to do so. While mindful of the process established by the UN Charter, we suggest that the Council engage more systematically with the wider UN membership on its recommendations-making process. Regular and formal information sharing with opportunity for interactions would be welcome. Third, we would strengthen inclusivity and share responsibility. The Council's work should benefit fully from the perspective and expertise of all its members. It should also draw on diverse regional perspectives and the experience of states directly affected by issues on the Council agenda. Vietnam therefore encourages further practical and consistent implementation of the principles contained in Note 507. There should be opportunities for all Council members to serve as pen holders or co-pen holders. There should be opportunities for those directly concerned to participate in deliberations and drafting as appropriate. Finally, Vietnam believes that members of the Council should engage meaningfully in the broader effort on Security Council reform. We need to address existing imbalances and make the Council more representative, effective, and responsive to current realities. Mr. President, working methods are a means to an end. Predictable procedures, transparent processes, and inclusive participation should create conditions for dialogue, compromise, and effective action. We encourage the Council to build on today's discussion and translate the useful ideas put forward by Member States into practical improvements. Vietnam stands ready to contribute constructively to this effort. I thank you.
Representative of Vietnam for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Thank you, President. We welcome the convening of this open debate on the working methods of the Council amidst discussions on the broader reform of the United Nations and the process to appoint the next Secretary General. While these processes are considered by the wider UN membership, a discussion of the working methods of the Council at this time is equally important to achieve a more credible, transparent, and effective Security Council. Indeed, the rapidly changing geopolitical environment requires a closer look at the functioning of the Council and how it can improve in delivering on its mandate of maintaining international peace and security. President, we express appreciation to the co-chairs of the Council's informal working group on documentation and other procedural questions, Denmark and Pakistan, for their dedication and continued efforts to improve the working methods of the Council. In this regard, we continue to call for the formal adoption of the Council's rules of procedure to better guide its work and ensure its functioning is free from opaque practices. President, we are concerned by the ever-growing delays in the appointment of the chairs of subsidiary bodies, which for a second consecutive year has compromised the functioning of the Council and the implementation of its resolutions and decisions. This year's delay is based on a seemingly intractable divergence in the Council on the legitimacy of one of its subsidiary bodies. We call on the Council members to resolve this matter as soon as possible and to adopt practices that prevent such delays. Furthermore, as all Member States are affected by and bound by the Council's resolutions, we encourage the Council to consider providing briefings to the wider membership of the UN on the work of sanctions committees, as has been done by the 1540 Committee. This would afford an opportunity to Member States to provide feedback on how they are implementing the relevant Council resolutions in support of the work of the different committees. President, South Africa is concerned by the Council's inaction in the face of ongoing atrocities and violations such as in Gaza, notwithstanding the fragile ceasefire that's in place, and the continued settler violence and displacement in the West Bank, as well as its failure to call for an urgent end to the hostilities in the Persian Gulf and resumption of negotiations. The Security Council is the primary organ of the United Nations charged with the maintenance of international peace and security. We call for the preservation of the Council's mandate in line with Article 25 of the UN Charter and caution against the outsourcing of its mandate to unrepresentative structures outside of the UN that undermine the sanctity of multilateralism with the United Nations at its core. President, the Council will soon conduct its second straw poll related to the selection and appointment of the next Secretary General. We call on the Council to share the outcomes of such straw polls, as we heard from the briefer this morning as well, and to do so formally with all Member States to ensure transparency and inclusivity, not merely to inform it that a poll has taken place. While we acknowledge improvements in the selection process of the Secretary General, in line with UN General Assembly Resolution 79/327, we also call for transparency in the selection process by the Council prior to the submission of its recommendations to the General Assembly. To give effect to the latter, if the Council is unable to make a single recommendation, it should consider recommending more than one candidate for the General Assembly to decide on and to exercise its due authority on the matter. President, we also encourage meaningful consultations with Member States on the agenda of the Security Council. In recent years, the Council functioning has improved with a greater role played by the elected members on the Council. This includes a more active role of these members based on their respective comparative expertise and advantages as penholders for resolutions and various outcomes of the Council. We appreciate that the African members of the Council, the A3, have been afforded a greater role in this regard, especially in terms of matters impacting the African continent. We welcome the continued engagement between Peace and Security Council of the African Union and the UN Security Council to further synergize efforts to bring about lasting peace through the permanent silencing of the guns in Africa. In this regard, we look forward to the review of the Security Council Resolution 2719 and its implementation by the Council in support of African-led peacekeeping operations. President, we have noted with appreciation the efforts undertaken for informal engagement on the annual report of the Council and encourages the continuation of this practice for engagement with the wider UN membership. In this regard, we underscore the need for substantive and substantial annual reports, rather than a mere narrative on the activities undertaken by the Council. In conclusion, Mr. President, pending the indispensable structural reform of the UN Security Council, there is much that can be done by the Council to improve its working methods to ensure that it is able to respond to pressing and urgent international peace and security challenges. It has been the elected members of the Council that have led the work in this respect, drawing on Article 24 of the Charter, which provides the Council members carrying out their duties under their responsibilities to the Council, act on behalf of all UN member states. It would be in the best interest of the Council and enhance its integrity if all members of the Council followed this example. I thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Australia.
Thank you, President, and let me also thank our briefer, Shamala Kandaya-Thompson, for your contribution today. It's much appreciated. President, the Security Council acts on behalf of all member states in executing its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Working methods, as we're discussing today, matter because they're the means by which the Council fulfills that responsibility. We believe that effective, transparent and inclusive ways of working equip the Council to implement its critical mandate. They also allow the wider membership to hold the Council accountable. Australia wishes to make 4 points. First, we are profoundly concerned by the ongoing delay in appointing chairs of the Council's subsidiary bodies. These bodies undertake much of the essential day-to-day work of the Council and facilitate the provision of valuable information and analysis to all member states. Regrettably, the delay has deprived all member states of the full benefit of this important reporting and engagement, and we urge the Council to resolve the current impasse and consider practical options for avoiding similar delays in the future, including by formulating clear, written pathways for resolving any disagreements that may arise. Second, the Council is currently engaged in one of its most important tasks, formulating a recommendation to the General Assembly for the appointment of the next Secretary-General. Australia welcomes efforts to make this process more transparent, and it's unfortunate that additional measures could not be also agreed. It will be important to document lessons learned once the process is complete so that future council members can benefit from the experience of current members. Third, we reiterate our long-standing concerns regarding the use of the veto, which too often prevents the council from responding meaningfully to crises. We continue to support the ACT Code of Conduct and the French-Mexican Initiative. We also urge council members to fully adhere to Article 27.3 of the Charter and support efforts to clarify its provisions. Finally, the conduct of council meetings deserves continued attention. Adherence to speaking time limits by briefers and council members would promote more focused deliberations and help ensure responsible use of limited United Nations resources. President, working methods are more than a technical exercise. They are a critical tool that allows the Council to implement its mandate on behalf of the wider membership. And Australia supports a Council that is transparent, inclusive, representative and effective. As candidates for the Council in 2029 and 30, we pledge to work constructively with all Member States to achieve this goal. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Australia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Spain. You have the floor.
Presidente, gracias por convocar este debate abierto y como es la primera vez que mi delegación...
This is the first time that my delegation is taking the floor during your presidency. I would also like to wish you every success in this role. Spain reaffirms its firm commitment to strengthening the methods of work of this Security Council. We're convinced that a council that is more representative, democratic, and transparent is also a more effective organ and better prepared to respond to contemporary challenges of international peace and security. When procedures are inclusive and predictable, the legitimacy of the decisions of the Council is clearly strengthened. Note S.
24/507 constituye un ejercicio valioso de consolidación de buenas prácticas.
Consolidation of good practices, which should continue to evolve to respond to the new challenges confronting this Council. Spain considers a priority to strengthen those provisions aimed at ensuring a more systematic interaction between the Council and the membership. For this, it is essential to improve the predictability of the work and timely access to documentation and information. These are essential elements to ensure the inclusivity and effective participation of member states. The Toledo Formula, introduced by Spain in 2015 during our presidency of the Council,
es un ejemplo concreto de cómo avanzar en esta dirección. Las sesiones de cierre no son un mero resumen.
Not a mere monthly summary, but rather a forum for dialogue where permanent representatives respond to questions. We also believe it's necessary to expand spaces for dialogue and building trust through the more frequent use of informal meetings and interactive dialogues. It's also important to strengthen the practice of sharing drafts of texts well in advance and promote processes of negotiation that are more inclusive. With regard to the application of Rules 37 and 39, Spain attaches great importance to the participation.
Especialmente afectados por las cuestiones examinadas por este Consejo. Una aplicación coherente.
A coherent, predictable, and transparent application of these rules is essential because the participation of these states offers perspectives and information that is of great value for deliberations. Mr. President, to facilitate broader consensus, it's essential to move towards a more balanced distribution of the work of the Council, especially with regard to the distribution of drafting of resolutions. Spain also supports strengthening cooperation between the Security Council and the General Assembly in line with the resolution on the revitalization of the General Assembly.
Con la Comisión de Consolidación de la Paz. Por último, abogamos por un mayor escrutinio en el uso del veto y por reforzar la rendición de cuentas. Instamos una vez más a todos los Estados miembros.
All member states to join the Franco-Mexican initiative that promotes the restraint in the use of veto in case of mass atrocities and the code of conduct of the ACT group. We believe that both initiatives should be incorporated to the rules of procedure of the Council. We also recall that Article 27.3 of the Charter is applicable to all members of the Council. Mr. President, to conclude, methods of work of the Council must
adecuadamente a las realidades contemporáneas. Nuestro objetivo común debe ser que las disposiciones de la Nota 507 se traduzcan en prácticas y resultados tangibles que fortalezcan la legitimidad.
That strengthen the legitimacy and the effectiveness of the Security Council. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Spain for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is grateful for the efforts of Denmark and Pakistan
5 del Grupo de Trabajo Informal sobre Documentación y otras cuestiones de procedimiento en la preparación de esta sesión. Reafirmamos que la transparencia, la apertura, la inclusión y la rendición de cuentas deben orientar todas las actividades, enfoques y procedimientos del Consejo de Seguridad de conformidad con el compendio integral recogido en la Nota 507 adoptada el 13 de diciembre de 2024.
A council that works with clear, predictable methods strengthens the legitimacy of its decisions in the eyes of all the members of the United Nations. As far as penholdership, we reiterate our concern about the
Mover agendas particulares en detrimento a enfoques consultivos y orientados al consenso. Reafirmamos que quienes ejercen la pluma o la copluma deben actuar con responsabilidad, imparcialidad y apego a fuentes fidedignas, y reiteramos la necesidad de una distribución más equitativa de esta función, incluyendo un mayor protagonismo de los miembros elegidos, en particular los 3 miembros africanos, República Democrática del
Republic of the Congo, Liberia, and Somalia. With regard to topics,
como la elaboración de términos de referencia claros en los arreglos de copluma. Sobre el equilibrio entre sesiones públicas y privadas, valoramos que en 2025 la amplia mayoría de las reuniones del Consejo se hayan celebrado en formato público y alentamos a que esta tendencia se mantenga como regla general, reservando las consultas privadas para aquellos casos en que resulten indispensables para propiciar un intercambio franco y constructivo entre sus miembros. Destacamos asimismo la importancia de fortalecer la interacción entre el Consejo de Seguridad y la Comisión de la Consolidación de la Paz, en línea con lo previsto en la Nota 507 y con las conclusiones del examen de 2025 de la Arquitectura de Consolidación de la Paz, incluyendo solicitudes de asesoramiento más específicas y diálogos interactivos oficiosos conjuntos previos a las misiones visitadoras del Consejo. Alentamos el desarrollo de las misiones visitadoras del Consejo a situaciones en conflicto, práctica empleada desde su primera misión a Camboya y Vietnam en 1964. Estas misiones deben tener un carácter diplomático para recopilación de información de primera mano y apoyo a los procesos de paz, siempre en estricto respeto a la soberanía del país receptor. Dichas misiones ofrecen a los miembros del Consejo la posibilidad de conocer directamente las realidades sobre el terreno y de mantener contacto con los actores locales. Instamos, por tanto, a retomar este instrumento con mayor regularidad, incluso mediante misiones de formato reducido cuando las limitaciones presupuestarias así lo requieran, para constituir un mecanismo insustituible para el ejercicio informado y eficaz de las funciones del Consejo en materia de mantenimiento de la paz y seguridad internacionales. Finalmente, la República Bolivariana de Venezuela reitera que el fortalecimiento de los métodos del trabajo del Consejo de Seguridad no es un fin en sí mismo, sino un medio para consolidar el multilateralismo, el Estado del Derecho y el respeto irrestricto a los propósitos y principios de la Carta. Renovamos nuestro firme compromiso de continuar contribuyendo de manera constructiva a que el Consejo actúe con mayor transparencia, eficacia, inclusión y rendición de cuentas, sin dobles raseros ni enfoques selectivos, en el cumplimiento de su responsabilidad primordial de mantener la paz y seguridad internacionales. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Philippines. You have the floor, please.
Mr. President, the Philippines thanks both Denmark
for convening this important annual debate, and Ms. Sharmala Thompson for her insightful briefing. The effectiveness of the Security Council depends not only on the decisions it takes, but more importantly, on its decision-making processes and the working methods underpinning these processes. The Council's working methods are therefore integral to strengthening the Council's legitimacy, credibility, and capacity to discharge its responsibilities under the Charter. We therefore welcome Presidential Note S. 2024-507 as a practical framework for making the Council's work more transparent, inclusive, accountable, and effective. The challenge is to ensure its faithful and consistent implementation. Mr. President, in our view, strengthening dialogue and interaction with the wider United Nations membership are key. Member states should have genuine opportunities to contribute to the Council's decision-making processes. Meaningful participation and contribution mean more than the opportunity to address the Council in meetings such as this. We therefore welcome the note's emphasis on early engagement and consultation, including close consultations with concerned states, neighboring countries, regional organizations, and other stakeholders as appropriate during the process of drafting the Council's products. This should become standard practice. In this regard, as ASEAN Chair this year, we put forth ASEAN's perspective in the Council open debates on maritime security and the rule of law. These engagements demonstrated how regional experience in preventive diplomacy, confidence-building international law, and practical cooperation with regional groups can enrich the Council's deliberations. We likewise encourage the consistent use of Rules 37 and 39, informal interactive dialogues with the relevant non-members, ARIA formula meetings, and open debates, among others, so that the views and perspectives of the wider membership can be taken into account on any dispute or situation under the Council's consideration. Council presidents are also encouraged to continue interactive wrap-up sessions and informal dialogues with the wider membership. Elected members should also continue briefing and engaging their respective regional groups on Council issues. We're also concerned by the delay this year in constituting the Council's subsidiary bodies. This has affected the participation and engagement of the wider membership of the Council. So we support suggestions raised by E10 and the briefer this morning to revisit and strengthen certain sections of the note. On the appointment of the UN Secretary General, we encourage the Council to provide the wider membership with public information on the outcome of the straw polls, consistent with the respective roles of the General Assembly and the Security Council in the selection and appointment process, bearing in mind Rule 141 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly. More generally, as principal organs of the United Nations, Ways and Means beyond the annual Security Council report should be considered to enhance the relationship between the General Assembly and the Security Council, as is being done between the General Assembly and the ECOSOC. Mr. President, more open, transparent, inclusive, and predictable Council working methods would contribute, in our view, to a more effective Council. By engaging earlier, listening more broadly, and drawing systematically on the perspective of the wider membership, the Council can make decisions that would command more ownership and thus lead to more active participation of the general membership in implementing Council decisions. In conclusion, the Philippines encourages the faithful implementation of the Presidential Note S. 2024-507 and strengthening the provisions where experience demonstrates such need. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Philippines for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Guatemala.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President,
a Dinamarca la convocatoria de este debate anual y reitera su apoyo a un consejo de
for a more transparent, inclusive, and effective Security Council.
Desde la presentación de la señora Shamala Thompson. Como ha señalado mi delegación en anteriores ocasiones, los métodos de trabajo no son un asunto puramente procedimental. Estos determinan la legitimidad con la que este órgano ejerce la responsabilidad primordial que le confiere la Carta y su impacto trasciende el propio Consejo, ya que incide en la legitimidad de las Naciones Unidas en su conjunto. Por ello, Guatemala desea reiterar 4 prioridades. En primer lugar, observamos con preocupación el retraso consistente en la asignación de presidentes
of chairs of subsidiary bodies, which this year have once again affected the function.
Sanciones y grupos de trabajo. En años anteriores, el Consejo ya ha escuchado diversas propuestas orientadas a mejorar el proceso de asignación de dichas presidencias. En ese sentido, hacemos un llamado a continuar considerando estas propuestas y adoptar medidas para evitar que esta situación se repita. Asimismo, recordamos que la nota 507 indica que los
507 indicates that council members are committed to making every effort to agree.
el año siguiente, a más tardar el 1 de octubre. En ese sentido, hacemos un llamado para la aplicación.
We call for the full and predictable implementation of Note 507. Second, Guatemala
continuar promoviendo la moderación en el uso del veto. Reconocemos el valor del mecanismo establecido para que
mechanism established for the General Assembly to consider situations in which this prerogative is exercised.
su llamado a los miembros permanentes para que se abstengan de emplearla en situaciones de genocidio, crímenes de guerra,
war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Third, Guatemala favors broadening
una distribución más equitativa en la responsabilidad de actuar como redactor,
including co-penholdership arrangements with clear terms of reference, would help strengthen the quality and legitimacy of the Council's decisions. Finally, within the framework of
del próximo o próxima secretario o secretaria general, consideramos igualmente importante que
important that this process be conducted with the highest standards of transparency and inclusiveness toward the
Presidente, el Consejo de Seguridad verá fortalecida su capacidad para mantener la paz y seguridad.
To maintain international peace and security will be strengthened insofar as it acts with transparency, openness.
En la medida en que escuche las perspectivas de los Estados miembros de las Naciones Unidas.
Guatemala will continue to support from within the general membership every genuine
Encaminado a fortalecer la aplicación y continuar la modernización de los métodos de trabajo de este Consejo
of this Council as an indispensable step towards a broader and necessary reform of the.
I thank the representative of Guatemala for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Mr. President, I applaud Denmark's presidency and thank you for convening this important discussion. I'd also like to thank Ms. Shamala Thompson for her briefing. Kenya welcomes the continued evolution of the Security Council's working methods and the guidance that Note S/2024/507 provides. Having served on the Security Council across 3 distinct eras, most recently in 2021-2022, Kenya has witnessed firsthand how changes in the international system have shaped the Council's agenda and working methods. In our experience, effective working methods must adapt to changing realities while strengthening how authority is exercised, consensus built, and the Council's legitimacy and effectiveness sustained. Mr. President, allow me to make 5 general observations in line with today's debate. First, Note 507 serves as an important compendium of the Council's working methods. However, some provisions are unevenly applied depending on the circumstances, the presidency, or the composition of the Council, thereby impacting on the Council's work. We therefore encourage periodic reviews of the implementation and application of the codified practices to help identify recurring difficulties, capture lessons learned, and recommend practical adjustments to ensure that Note 507 remains responsive to the Council's evolving needs. Second, all Council members have a voice and a vote, but this does not always translate into equal procedural influence. Asymmetries in access to information, agenda setting, pen holdership, institutional memory, and established working practices can constrain the ability of elected members to shape outcomes. To address this, we encourage a more inclusive decision-making process and collective ownership of the Council's work. Regional perspectives could, where relevant, be incorporated at an early stage of drafting on matters with significant regional implications, and more opportunities for pen holdership could be afforded to elected members as co-leads on selected files. Third, occasional deadlocks in the selection and appointment of chairs and vice chairs of subsidiary bodies paralyze those institutions. To unlock such deadlocks, we encourage early consultations to ensure timely appointment of the leadership of the subsidiary bodies. We also call for a fair distribution of responsibilities among all council members. Fourth, Mr. President, Rules 37 and 39 provide important avenues for meaningful participation by non-council members in this council's deliberations. Kenya supports the predictable, consistent, and purposeful application of the rules and encourages the council to engage regional and sub-regional organizations more systematically, building on their regional perspectives and expertise. The council should make more strategic use of the Peace-Building Commission, where its engagement can add value to the prevention and sustenance of peace or of the global peace agenda. Fifth, the working methods should help manage rather than deepen political divisions. The Council is currently operating in an increasingly polarized geopolitical environment where existing divisions can sometimes compound political contestations. These situations call for informal approaches, such as retreats and consultations, to narrow differences and build understanding before positions become entrenched, making disagreement more manageable and consensus more attainable. This approach should guide major processes involving the wider membership, including the selection of the Secretary General, where transparency, inclusiveness, and merit should be pursued with regard to the respective prerogatives of the General Assembly and the Security Council. Mr. President, going forward, we propose that the next phase of discussion focus not only on the standards we've endorsed, but on how consistently those standards are applied, particularly under conditions of political pressure and procedural complexity. Kenya recognizes the urgent need for comprehensive reform of the UN Security Council to make it more effective and representative. We acknowledge the complementary role of the reform of working methods and that structural reform of the Security Council, and reaffirm our determination to work together towards this end. Questions of representation, membership, and the veto remain essential and must continue to be addressed. We encourage meaningful participation by the wider UN membership in discussions geared towards making the Security Council's working methods more predictable, inclusive, transparent, accountable, and adaptive to contemporary realities. I thank you.
Of Kenya for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Paraguay.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, we want to...
La delegación de la República del Paraguay agradece la oportunidad de tomar la palabra en este debate y felicita a la presidencia de Dinamarca para el Consejo de Seguridad, pues entendemos que los debates anuales sobre los métodos de trabajo de este Consejo son un momento de singular relevancia para la evolución de un cuerpo colegiado eficiente, efectivo.
Collegial body that is capable of fulfilling the mandate endowed by the Charter. We're also grateful to the Director for her briefing. Mr. President, the burden of maintaining international peace and security makes this organ responsible for
de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas puedan realizarse. El Consejo de Seguridad tiene fundamentos.
Can operate smoothly. Its work has
como el ECOSOC la creación y puesta en marcha de las operaciones de mantenimiento de paz, la garantía del
and launch of peacekeeping operations is a guarantee of human rights, peace-building commission, the International Court of Justice, a membership, and generally speaking, the entire implementation of the peace-building architecture. One of the first points to highlight is that the Council continues to work on the basis of provisional rules in order to ensure great
estabilidad y seguridad jurídica. Es necesario actualizar y aprobar un reglamento que reúna las condiciones formales y de fondo que permita al Consejo trabajar de forma efectiva. La previsibilidad en la nominación de presidencias y vicepresidencias de los órganos subsidiarios, la presidencia rotativa con garantías previstas previamente para asegurar que los miembros no permanentes puedan
ensure that non-permanent members can fulfill this function at least once during their membership. Transparency in the process of negotiations on resolutions, presidential statements, and notes that affect the rules. These are topics that are of great importance.
Que la ONU. Esta situación procedimental actual ensancha el desbalance de poder no solo entre los miembros permanentes y no permanentes, sino entre los miembros del Consejo y la membresía en general de nuestra organización. Señor Presidente, la relación entre la Asamblea General y el Consejo de Seguridad sigue siendo un asunto de importancia capital. Nuestra delegación considera
Our delegation considers that this should be strengthened and that the Council should acknowledge that its legitimacy depends on respect of the full membership and the strict compliance with its mandate, which is why it should make efforts to become more representative, transparent, effective.
De sus decisiones. El pilar de paz y seguridad está bajo la lupa de la comunidad internacional. Sin embargo, aun cuando no sea un órgano de representación universal, el trabajo del Consejo de Seguridad es en gran medida el termómetro mundial del desempeño de la ONU en la garantía del mantenimiento de la paz y la seguridad internacionales.
Of maintaining international peace and security. With this in mind, we welcome the efforts of the informal working group on documentation and other procedural issues for the publication of its annual report, guided by the principles of openness, dialogue, and inclusion. This should continue. Mr. President.
Estados miembros hemos sido testigos de las grandes divergencias que existen en relación con el uso del veto durante las últimas sesiones de negociaciones intergubernamentales sobre la reforma de este órgano. El Paraguay considera que el veto debe abolirse, limitarse o restringirse de manera formal, en especial para los casos que incluyan medidas destinadas a prevenir los crímenes
aimed at preventing the most serious crimes or mass atrocities. Likewise, it's very important to have to be aware that the use of this right implies great responsibility and ultimately should be used with full responsibility and should lead to accountability.
De los estados en virtud de lo dispuesto en el artículo 2.1 de la Carta. En el mismo sentido, consideramos los miembros de las Naciones Unidas no pueden cumplir la Carta de manera selectiva, por lo que instamos al pleno cumplimiento del artículo 26.
Application of Article 27.3, the quality of annual reports of the
hacia el pleno de la Asamblea General. Creemos que deben poseer menos cualidad.
They should be less descriptive and more in-depth in terms of analysis and should include analysis of the most delicate decisions that the Council has taken. Finally, Paraguay is in favor.
Conlleve la máxima transparencia, inclusión y la equidad en dicho proceso. Comprendemos el protagonismo que corresponde al Consejo de Seguridad en dicho proceso, pero al mismo tiempo consideramos de vital importancia que el papel de la Asamblea General no se limite a simplemente respaldar la recomendación del Consejo. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the representative of Paraguay for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of El Salvador.
Presidente, El Salvador agradece.
Mr. President, El Salvador is grateful for convening this debate and for your work in promoting ongoing reflection on methods of work of the Security Council.
Por nuestra delegación en debates sobre la necesidad de contar con un consejo más transparente, inclusivo, representativo y eficaz. Y hoy quisiéramos concentrarnos en algunos ámbitos en los que consideramos necesario avanzar de manera concreta. Primero, destacamos la relación entre el Consejo de Seguridad y la Comisión de la Consolidación de la Paz. Mi país ha abogado consistentemente por
advocated for strengthening the complementarity between both organs, and as a current member of the Commission, we reaffirm our commitment to actively contribute to strengthening this relationship. The Commission could offer the Council a preventive perspective, a long-term preventive.
Más amplio de factores que sostienen la paz. Sin embargo, para que este aporte tenga impacto, debe producirse cuando todavía puede incidir en las decisiones. Alentamos, por tanto, al Consejo y a quienes ejercen funciones de redacción a solicitar de manera más sistemática el asesoramiento de la Comisión, particularmente antes de renovaciones de mandatos y procesos de transición, y a formular
before renewal of mandates or during transition processes, and to formulate more specific requests that allow the Commission to offer timely and relevant recommendations. Note 507 promotes instruments to achieve this, including informal interactive dialogues with the presidency of the Commission.
En segundo lugar, resulta imposible desvincular los métodos de trabajo de los efectos del veto. El Salvador reitera su profunda preocupación por su utilización y por las consecuencias que continúa teniendo para la capacidad del Consejo de actuar frente a amenazas de la paz y seguridad internacionales. Esta preocupación no se limita al veto formal. La amenaza expresa,
whether explicit or implicit, of its use could also prevent proposals from being submitted, negotiated, or subject to voting. In other words, the paralysis of the Council is not always reflected in its voting records. This is why we support
permiten su uso, fortalezcan la transparencia en torno a sus efectos y profundicen los mecanismos existentes de rendición de cuentas. Y en ese sentido reafirmamos nuestro apoyo a la Resolución 76/262 y al papel de la Asamblea General cuando el Consejo no logra actuar. Consideramos que la rendición de cuentas debe abarcar no solamente las decisiones que el Consejo adopta,
adopts, but also those that it is not managed to adopt. Thirdly, we want to refer to the function of penholdership and co-penholdership. The 10 elected members represent 2/3 of the membership of the Council and therefore offer regional.
Deben encontrar una expresión sustantiva en la elaboración de sus decisiones. Valoramos la expansión gradual de esquemas de corredacción entre miembros permanentes y elegidos. Estos arreglos pueden combinar memoria institucional con conocimiento regional y contribuir a ampliar la legitimidad y el respaldo de los productos del Consejo. Pero la corredacción debe ir más allá.
Penholdership should go further. It requires real responsibilities, early consultations, and sufficient time to negotiate and to seek genuine consensus. This responsibility also includes listening to those who will need to implement the decisions adopted in
mandatos de operaciones de paz. Los redactores y corredactores deben mantener consultas sustantivas y oportunas con los países que aportan contingentes y fuerzas de policía, y sus opiniones deben de ser debidamente consideradas en la elaboración de los textos. Estas consultas no pueden convertirse en un ejercicio formal. Deben permitir que las decisiones del
They should make it possible for decisions of the Council to reflect the operational realities on the ground. Fourth,
el proceso en curso para la selección y el nombramiento del próximo secretario o secretaria general.
Is concrete proof of the
Valoramos los avances alcanzados en la participación de la membresía y consideramos
membership, and we believe it is essential to preserve this through all the phases of this process. Transparency.
Disminuir a medida que el proceso avanza hacia el Consejo. Debería existir una coordinación estrecha y continua con la Asamblea General, reglas previsibles y acceso equitativo a la información pertinente para todos los Estados miembros. El próximo liderazgo de la organización debe surgir de un proceso que fortalezca y no reduzca la confianza de la membresía de Naciones Unidas.
Confidence of the membership of the United Nations. Lastly, we reiterate that the full, egalitarian, and meaningful participation of women must continue to be part and parcel of the methods of work of the Council. This requires not only ensuring their participation as rapporteurs, but also systematically incorporating the analysis on the differentiated impact of conflicts on women and girls.
Y decisiones del Consejo. Presidente, los métodos de trabajo no
Of work are not merely a procedural issue. They determine who participates.
¿Quién puede influir en una decisión? ¿Qué perspectivas son escuchadas? Y en última instancia,
The capacity of the Council to act. El Salvador will continue to contribute to these efforts, convinced that a more inclusive Council and its procedures will be a more legitimate Council and more effective in its decisions. Thank you.
I thank the representative of El Salvador for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Belgium.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Benelux countries, a long-standing regional partnership comprising Luxembourg, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and my own country, Belgium. On the outset, we thank the Danish presidency for having convened this open debate on the working methods of the Security Council. We also wish to sincerely thank the Executive Director of Security Council report for her briefing and recommendations. The Benelux countries firmly believe that improving the working methods of the Security Council is essential to strengthening its transparency, accountability, inclusiveness, and effectiveness. At a time when the credibility of multilateral institutions is at stake, improving working methods is fundamental. We would like to highlight 4 points. Firstly, we share the concerns voiced by many delegations regarding the current deadlock in the appointment of chairs and vice chairs of subsidiary bodies. A record delay has severely affected the work of the Council. Delays should not become the norm. We encourage Council members to identify practical solutions and contingency measures that will ensure the timely allocation of these responsibilities and the uninterrupted functioning of the Council's subsidiary organs. Secondly, on the forthcoming appointment of the next Secretary General, this is of critical importance for the United Nations. The Benelux countries continue to advocate for a fair, transparent, and inclusive selection process, conducted on an equal basis for all candidates and fully in line with relevant General Assembly resolutions and established good practices. We welcome the public hearings of candidates and the improvement of the preliminary stages of the selection process. However, transparency could be enhanced, in particular, if the Security Council could communicate the results of the straw polls it conducts. More broadly, we see clear merit in further strengthening the relationship between the Security Council and the General Assembly. Enhanced exchanges between these two organs can contribute to greater accountability, transparency, and trust across the membership. The General Assembly's role as the most representative body of the United Nations should be fully reflected in these efforts. Thirdly, according to Article 24 of the Charter, the Security Council acts on behalf of the entire membership of the United Nations. Its working methods should therefore be as transparent and inclusive as possible. We encourage the continued use of mechanisms that facilitates meaningful exchanges with the wider membership, including area formula meetings, direct interactions with stakeholders, NGOs, and civil society representatives. These can enrich the Council's understanding of ongoing crisis. We also support strengthening interaction between the Security Council, the General Assembly, ECOSOC, and the Peacebuilding Commission, as well as ensuring that the Council benefits from relevant expertise across the United Nations system, including from the Human Rights Pillar. And finally, the continued use and threat of use of the veto remains one of the principal obstacles to the Council's ability to fulfill its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. The Benelux countries reiterate their support for initiatives aimed at promoting restraint in the use of the veto, particularly in situations involving mass atrocities. We also welcome efforts by the General Assembly to enhance accountability following the use of a veto. We further recall the importance of Article 27(3) of the Charter, which stipulates that a party to a dispute shall abstain from voting. Respect for this provision would strengthen confidence in the impartiality and credibility of the Council. Mr. President, the Benelux countries remain firmly committed to supporting improvements to the working methods of the Security Council. A more transparent, inclusive and effective Council is in the interest of all Member States and essential to the credibility of our multilateral system. I thank you.
For the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Los métodos de trabajo son primordiales para el funcionamiento del Consejo de Seguridad y para la
and for the credibility of the United Nations itself. They cannot be considered as a merely procedural matter. Article 24, paragraph 1 of the Charter is clear.
Al Consejo de Seguridad la responsabilidad primordial de mantener la paz y la seguridad internacionales, y el Consejo actúa a nombre de ellos. Si el Consejo actúa en nombre de los Estados miembros, su manera de operar no concierne únicamente a sus 15 miembros. No cabe una interpretación restrictiva del artículo 30 de la Carta. Un Consejo más democrático, representativo, no depende
does not depend only on those who are seated around this table,
sino también de cómo funciona y ejerce su deber de representación. Hace exactamente 20 años y un mes se adoptó la nota S/2006, diagonal 507, conocida como la nota 507. Ha habido progresos, aunque persisten muchos de los desafíos en materia de transparencia, participación, inclusividad, capacidad de toma de decisiones, el sistema de portaplumas open holders, la distribución de las presidencias de los órganos subsidiarios. El Ecuador
acknowledges the progress achieved. The adoption of updated Note 507 in December of 2024 was an important step.
Consejo de Seguridad. Pero actualizar los métodos de trabajo no es suficiente si el Consejo de Seguridad no es capaz de aplicarlos. Si el Consejo tiene dificultades para acordar responsabilidades necesarias para su funcionamiento, esto no puede considerarse una cuestión procedimental menor. Afecta su capacidad para cumplir su mandato. Las dificultades para seleccionar las presidencias y vicepresidencias de los órganos subsidiarios
bodies is a concrete example of what I'm talking about. The brilliant intervention of the Security Council report, Shamala Thompson, this morning, frees me from having to go.
Al respecto y las sugerencias planteadas para dar solución futura a estos impases. Señor presidente, colegas, aquí además hago un planteamiento central, que así como los órganos subsidiarios del Consejo Económico y Social son ocupados incluso por países que no son parte al ECOSOC, los órganos subsidiarios del Consejo de Seguridad, bien podrían ser integrados por países.
Include countries that are not members of the Security Council. This would encourage a broader participation of member states in the work of the Security Council. I would encourage, in particular, the E10.
Una discusión amplia y seria sobre esta propuesta. Señor presidente, mejorar los métodos de trabajo no resolverá todas las divisiones del Consejo, pero es posible y necesario avanzar para fortalecer su legitimidad, eficacia y representatividad. Lorraine Sievers, directora de Security Council Procedure, expresó en
procedures in this same chamber said 4 years ago, battle lines can be drawn by such minor steps. When the opacity appears to surround the functioning of this council, this could increase the feeling of distrust.
Incluso de ilegitimidad. Pero incluso en tiempos de división como los actuales, Si se considera que el Consejo está haciendo un esfuerzo de buena fe para dar claridad a sus métodos de trabajo, eso puede contribuir a fomentar una asociación cooperativa con los miembros en general. Hago eco de ese planteamiento porque coincido con el mismo.
These comments because I agree with them and because I believe that in spite of the challenges, and I've witnessed the fact that
El Consejo ha probado su capacidad de mejorar y resolver. Muchas gracias.
its problems. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Burundi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. President, thank you for convening this open debate on the Security Council's working methods.
Revêt une importance particulière. À un moment où les conflits se multiplient, où les crises humanitaires s'aggravent et où la confiance dans le multilatéralisme est mise à rude épreuve, la crédibilité du Conseil de sécurité dépend non seulement de sa capacité à prendre des décisions, mais également de la manière dont ces décisions sont élaborées, adoptées et mises en œuvre. La note S-2024-707 constitue à cet égard un instrument important. Elle rassemble les pratiques et les engagements destinés à rendre le Conseil plus transparent, plus inclusif, plus efficace et plus efficient. Pour le Burundi, toutefois, le principal défi demeure celui de sa mise en œuvre effective. Une méthode de travail n'a de valeur que si elle est appliquée de manière cohérente, prévisible et équitable. Nous devons également reconnaître que certaines lacunes subsistent. L'application de certaines pratiques demeure inégale.
Practices are not implemented equally. The participation of states directly concerned is not sufficiently predictable. Some procedures don't have clear deadlines and consensus.
Agence politique entre les membres du Conseil. C'est sur ces questions que le Burundi souhaite concentrer son intervention en formulant quelques recommandations. Premièrement, le Conseil de sécurité devrait renforcer la participation des États directement concernés car il prend des décisions qui ont des conséquences concrètes sur les populations et les États qui ne siègent pas au Conseil. Leur voix doit donc être entendue. Le Burundi considère
Burundi believes that the application of Articles 37 and 39 of the Provisional Rules of Procedure
et substantielle des États directement concernés ou particulièrement affectés par
or particularly affected by the issues on the agenda. Their participation should not be seen as simply a procedural formality. A state that is directly concerned must be able to present its reading of the situation, must be able to explain the realities in the field, and share its concerns and contribute to discussions before the Council takes a decision that could affect it. We would therefore propose that, when relevant, more clear criteria, more consistent criteria be applied to identify situations where the participation of concerned states is particularly important, all the while fully respecting the prerogatives of the President and the rules of the Council. Secondly, we'd recommend making the working methods more inclusive, and this would help reduce divisions within the Council. Burundi recognizes the usefulness of the penholder system to allow the Council to react swiftly to crises. However, this effectiveness should also be inclusive. The preparation of text
le consensus et non comme un processus concentré entre un nombre limité de membres.
Concentrated between a limited number of members. In this connection, we encourage earlier sharing.
Des consultations substantielles avec tous les membres du Conseil, des consultations précoces avec des États directement concernés, une meilleure prise en compte de l'expertise des organisations régionales et sous-régionales, et lorsque cela est nécessaire, un délai raisonnable permettant au capital
for capitals to examine the drafts. We'd also encourage
des consultations informelles et des échanges en amont afin d'identifier les points de divergence.
Identify areas of divergence before they become dead ends. The role of a penholder must be one of facilitating consensus, not monopolizing.
La transparence du processus de négociation, la consultation précoce et la recherche d'intérêt d'entente sont parmi les moyens les plus efficaces pour réduire les divisions au sein du Conseil. Troisièmement, il faudrait améliorer la transparence et l'accès à l'information. Le Burundi
Access to information should be improved. Burundi believes that all member states must be able to understand, as much as possible, how decisions of the Council are prepared and how they're implemented. We therefore encourage more systematic use of digital tools to facilitate access to Council documentation, particularly for delegations who have more limited capacity. We also encourage the continued publication
des informations relatives aux méthodes de travail du Conseil. La transparence ne signifie pas que toutes les discussions doivent être publiques. Elle signifie que les procédures doivent être claires.
Procedures need to be clear, accessible, and applied consistently. Burundi also believes that more systematic follow-up of the implementation of Note 507 would be useful.
Des pratiques du Conseil pourraient permettre d'identifier les progrès réalisés, mais également les domaines dans lesquels les engagements restent insuffisamment appliqués. Quatrièmement,
applied. Fourthly, we should also improve the process for appointing chairs and vice chairs of subsidiary bodies. A delay in the appointment of them is a particularly worrying issue. These bodies play an essential role in the implementation,
notamment dans les domaines des sanctions, de la lutte contre le terrorisme et du suivi de certains dossiers. Lorsque leur fonctionnement est retardé, c'est l'efficacité même du Conseil qui est affectée.
in their work. The whole efficiency of the Council is affected. Burundi believes that the procedure set forth in paragraphs 124 to 129 of Note 507 should be strengthened further by further transparency and early consultations. The current difficulties would appear to be linked to a lack of sufficiently swift agreement between members of the Council and also late consultations and the need to strike an acceptable balance in how responsibilities are distributed. We would therefore encourage the establishment of a more clear calendar sufficiently upstream,
permettant d'identifier rapidement les candidatures ou préférences des membres, une recherche active du consensus,
procedure allowing to quickly identify nominations or preferences for members, and active seeking of consensus before disagreements become deadlocks, and also distribution of responsibilities that takes into account the capacities, experience, and as much as possible equitable representation between different regions. The aim must be to avoid that a procedural issue delays for a long time the functioning of a subsidiary body. Fifth, we should also strengthen relations between the Security Council, the General Assembly, and regional organisations. The Security Council acts on behalf of all members of the organisation. It should therefore be able to maintain a close dialogue with the entire UN community. Burundi attaches particular importance to
relations entre le Conseil de sécurité et l'Assemblée générale. Nous encourageons la poursuite des échanges réguliers.
We encourage regular discussions between the presidents of the two bodies, as well as a more substantive dialogue on issues of common interest. We also believe that cooperation with regional organisations must be strengthened. For Burundi, this is of particular importance because of the strategic relationship between the United Nations and the African Union. Regional organisations often have the historic, political and operational knowledge of the situations that the Council should make the most of. Regional
Uniquement lorsque la crise est déjà installée. Elle doit être intégrée
it should be included from the very first stages of prevention, mediation and solution seeking. Sixthly, we should also ensure that the work of the Council is closely aligned with the realities in the field. Working methods should allow the Council to better understand the reality that people are facing. Burundi continues, therefore, to support more regular field missions of the Security Council, particularly to
affectés par les conflits. Une présence sur le terrain permet aux membres du Conseil d'entendre directement les autorités nationales, les organisations régionales, les communautés affectées, les acteurs humanitaires.
Organisations, affected communities, humanitarian actors and other stakeholders. It could contribute to improving the quality of decisions made, and it could also strengthen their ownership. A council that listens more is a council that can take better decisions. President, Burundi believes that the reform of the working method of Security Council should serve a broader goal, which is to make the Council more representative, more transparent, more inclusive, more effective and more legitimate.
De l'ensemble des États membres, nous devons toutefois reconnaître une réalité. L'amélioration des méthodes de travail, aussi nécessaire soit-elle, ne peut à elle seule résoudre toutes les...
Alone resolve all the political differences that are affecting the Council. However, it can...
constructif d'une meilleure compréhension des positions des membres et d'une recherche...
And also it can help find consensus more effectively. In a world that is so profoundly divided, we need a council that is able to reach consensus without renouncing upon its mandate, able to listen without losing its capacity to act and to take decisions without moving even further away from states directly concerned.
Uniquement par de nouvelles règles. Il doit être restauré par la confiance, le dialogue, l'inclusion et la cohérence dans l'application des règles existantes. Pour conclure, le Burundi réaffirme sa disponibilité à travailler avec tous les États.
All member states to contribute to the continuous improvement of the Security Council's working methods. A more open council will be a credible council. A more inclusive council will be a more legitimate council. And a council that is more effective will be better able to serve serve international peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Burundi for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Denmark, holding the presidency this month, for convening this open debate on the implementation of Note S/2024/507, and express appreciation to Denmark and Pakistan for the concept note for this open debate. I also thank Ms. Shamala Kandia Thompson, Executive Director of Security Council Report, for a very insightful briefing. Working methods matter because they determine whether the Council can take the prompt and effective action entrusted to it under Article 24 of the Charter. Acting on behalf of all Member States under Article 24 and in view of Article 25, the Council must ensure that its procedures command confidence across wider membership of the UN. Sierra Leone accordingly regards the Council's working methods as central to the legitimacy, effectiveness, and accountability of the Council. Note 507 provides a valuable framework. It should, however, remain a living instrument, continuously reviewed against actual experience and strengthened wherever gaps may arise. Mr. President, Africa's position reflected in the African reform model calls for an accessible, accountable, democratic, representative, and more effective Council, especially in an enlarged format. We acknowledge the progress achieved thus far, yet more remains to be done. I will thus highlight 5 areas. First, implementation must be more systematic and measurable. We support strengthening the informal working group on documentation and other procedural questions and developing concise annual indicators of implementation, gaps, and corrective measures. The Digital Working Methods Handbook should be kept continuously updated as a transparent repository of practice and precedent, particularly for incoming members. Second, greater inclusion and shared responsibility are essential. Penholdership remains an important source of influence over Council outcomes. We welcome the increased use of co-pen holderships and encourage broader, more equitable sharing, particularly on issues affecting the regions of elected members. Early consultations and facilitation should resolve differences before they entrench, so that innovative methods serve consensus building rather than workload management. Third, agreeing the chairs and vice chairs of subsidiary bodies remains a recurring difficulty that requires a durable solution. Paragraphs 124 to 129 of Note 507 provide a useful framework, but the unprecedented delays of recent years show that voluntary consultation alone is not enough. Consultation should begin immediately following each council elections, supported by a transparent overview of available positions and guided by equitable geographical distribution and fair burden sharing. The 1st October target should be a firm political deadline. Crucially, we should agree in advance what happens when that deadline is not met. The Council already relies on objective mechanisms to prevent impasse, including the monthly rotation of the presidency in English alphabetical order and the drawing of lots for matters such as order of speakers. Sierra Leone thus proposes a comparable default. Any chairs or vice chairs left unassigned by the deadline would be allocated by a pre-agreed objective method, such as rotation or the drawing of lots, applied transparently and adjusted only to preserve equitable geographical distribution and relevant expertise. This would ensure that no subsidiary body is left without leadership and remove the incentive to hold the entire package hostage for unrelated concessions. Consensus would remain the rule for establishing any new subsidiary body. The default would govern only the distribution of leadership, with existing chairs continuing in place until successors are agreed. Fourth, Rules 37 and 39 should be applied consistently and predictably. States whose interests are specially affected should have a meaningful opportunity to participate, particularly where Council action bears directly on their security, sovereignty, territorial integrity, or peace process. Rule 39 briefers should be selected for expertise, relevance, and independence, with their full, safe, and meaningful participation assured. Fifth, the Council must deepen engagement with the wider membership, the General Assembly, the Peace-Building Commission, regional organizations, troop and police contributing countries, and affected states. The selection of the next Secretary General is an important test. While respecting the prerogatives of the two organs, it should benefit from early substantive engagement and remain guided by merit, competence, integrity, and broad confidence. Mr. President, for Sierra Leone and Africa, these questions carry particular weight, as the continent remains grossly underrepresented in the Council. It has a strong interest in a Council that listens to affected regions, works with regional organizations, and reflects contemporary realities. At a time when confidence in multilateralism is under strain, the Council cannot afford working methods that entrench paralysis. Sierra Leone therefore calls for measurable implementation of Note 507, more equitable pen holdership, timely and fair allocation of subsidiary body leadership backed by an objective default mechanism, consistent application of Rules 37 and 39, and stronger engagement with the wider membership. I thank you.
Thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Namibia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Namibia thanks Denmark for convening this important debate on Note 507, which contains important provisions aimed at strengthening transparency, inclusivity, accountability, and effectiveness of the Security Council. I also thank Madam Shamala Kandia Thompson for her comprehensive briefing. At the time when multilateralism is being tested by escalating conflicts, deepening geopolitical rivalries, and declining trust in multilateral institutions, the working methods of the Security Council must serve as a tool for building consensus and an essential determinant of the Council's legitimacy, credibility, and capacity to discharge its primary responsibility under the Charter of the United Nations in a manner that is representative, transparent, and responsive to contemporary realities. Mr. President, the adoption of Note 507 was an important achievement, yet its value will ultimately be measured not by what it contains, but by how faithful it is implemented. Too often, agreed working methods are applied selectively, while divisions among Council members continue to impede timely and decisive action in situations where international community expects leadership. Namibia is particularly concerned that entrenched divisions among Council members continue to undermine its effective action to threats to international peace and security. To bridge these divisions, members of the Council should renew their commitment to genuine dialogue, compromise, and the spirit of Article 24 of the Charter, placing the interests of international peace and security above narrow geopolitical considerations. In this context, Namibia joins other delegations in deploring the continued challenges and delays experienced in the appointment of chairs of the vice chairs of the Security Council's subsidiary bodies. The designation of these chairs should remain a technical and practical exercise guided by consensus, fairness, and the collective interest of the Council. Consistent with provisions in Para 103 and Para 104 of Note 507, Namibia strongly believes that the Council is most effective when it benefits from the perspectives of all UN member states, regional and sub-regional organizations, especially the African Union, and affected populations to advance principles of regional ownership and collective security that are at the heart of the Charter of the United Nations. Mr. President, more inclusive penholdership arrangements can contribute to stronger ownership of Council's products. The relevant provisions should be implemented in a manner that enables Council members, particularly those representing regions directly affected by issues under consideration, to play meaningful roles in drafting and shaping Council outcomes. The relationship between the Security Council and the General Assembly should be viewed as an ongoing and evolving process, with both organs continuously exploring innovative ways to further strengthen their interaction in a manner that is mutually reinforcing, contemporary, and fully consistent with their respective mandates. Greater interaction between these principal organs can ensure that concerns of the wider membership are adequately reflected in Council deliberations. As I conclude, Mr. President, the legitimacy deficit of the Security Council cannot be fully addressed through procedural reforms alone. While improved working methods can enhance transparency and efficiency, they cannot substitute the comprehensive Security Council reform. The persistent underrepresentation of Africa remains a historic injustice that weakens the legitimacy of the Council. Until such reform is realized, existing working methods must be implemented in a manner that amplifies the voices of underrepresented regions and ensures equitable participation in the Council's decision-making processes. The international community does not judge the Security Council by a number of contents of documents it adopts. It judges the Council by its ability to prevent conflict, protect vulnerable populations, and respond effectively when peace and security are threatened. The implementation of Note 507 and the continued strengthening of the Council's working methods offer an opportunity to rebuild trust, improve cooperation, and enhance the Council's relevance, and let us ensure that transparency is not selective, inclusivity is not symbolic, and accountability is not optional. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Namibia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Saudi Arabia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. بداية أود أن أتقدم بالشكر الجزيل لبعثتي الدنمارك وباكستان.
Missions of Denmark and Pakistan for organizing this debate, which allows all member states to share their visions and points of view on the working methods of the Council. I would also like to thank Ms. Thompson, Executive Director of the Security Council report, for her briefing. We welcome her essential role and commend her tireless efforts in this field. We support her recommendations. President, this session is being held at a critical time, which means that we all need to examine
مجلس الأمن من القيام بمهامه المنوطة فلطالما نادت المملكة
mandate. My country has always called for fostering the principles of transparency and objectivity in the working methods of the Council, so it is then able to fully exercise its mandate. The Council needs to be reformed to make it more transparent and effective and to allow greater participation of Member States in its work. Thus, the Council can shoulder its responsibilities to maintain international peace and security in line with the Charter. President, in this connection, we believe that we need
إليها في إطار الجهود الأوسع لإصلاح المجلس.
part of a broader reform of the Council. This reform is not simply an issue of the composition or representation, but it also is a question of working methods and how it interacts with other member states. In this connection, my country supports the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform to achieve global reform that reflects the reality of the international community, and it would strengthen equitable representation and it would benefit from broad support from member states. Consultations should be more transparent, and non-members of the Council need to have access to the
من الصعوبات التي تشكل عائقا أمام اختيار رؤساء الهيئات الفرعية للمجلس تتطلب
There are currently difficulties being faced in appointing the chairs of the subsidiary bodies, and we've seen this year an unprecedented delay in these appointments. This is having an impact on the Council's consideration of critical files, and we hope that the Council members will agree on this to ensure equitable distribution and balanced distribution of responsibilities to allow for work to continue.
إجرائية IWJ ومسار تحديث المذكرة 507 الخاصة
Group on documentation and other procedural questions, and also the process for implementing Note 507. All of these efforts are a step in the right direction, particularly as part of the work on the veto, which has a negative impact, the veto on the work of the Council. The link between the Security Council, the General Assembly, and ECOSOC should also be improved, because this is the best way of improving the effectiveness of the work of the United Nations broadly.
الهادفة لتعزيز الشفافية والكفاءة وتوزيع المشاركة إلا أننا لم
Effectiveness. However, so far, we haven't yet managed to find a comprehensive solution which would allow the Council to fulfill its fundamental mission. Here we call for favourable consideration to be given to proposals to reform the Council. Of course, negotiations carried out as part of the General Assembly, that is the only way of reaching an agreement on reform. For example, the expansion of the Council
الذي تم اعتماده بتوافق الآراء لوضع أسس عملية للمفاوضات تسهم
by consensus, and it's laid the foundations for the negotiation for a more representative council, a more impartial council, and a more credible one. We are ready to work with others to meet this noble objective. President, we are certain that we can improve the work of the Council, particularly thanks to a clear, transparent and official mechanism which would allow Member States to have access to the outcomes of closed meetings of the Council. We also
الدول المعنية بالقضايا التي تمسها بصورة مباشرة والاستماع إلى
countries on the agenda of the Council who are or indeed countries concerned to understand their position and to take into account all of the information that they can provide when Council projects or resolutions are drafted. This would foster consensus and allow for these products to be implemented. In the penholder role, we would encourage a consultative process that listens to states concerned and regional organizations that are working in that field. Thus, we will be able to benefit from the knowledge of these organizations, the regional organizations, in their work on prevention and conflict resolution.
والاستفادة من معرفتها بالسياقات الإقليمية ودورها في منع
In terms of speakers who are invited to the Council, we should make sure that the statements are not politicized. This only stokes conflict around the world. These invitations should also be accepted by other member states. Transparency of the process for appointing the next Secretary General.
والأجهزة الرئيسية للأمم المتحدة مع إرساء آليات واضحة وشفافة.
Guard the role of the GA and key bodies of the UN.
من العام القادم. ختاما السيد الرئيس، ستواصل بلادي مشاركتها البناءة في المناقشات المتعلقة بتطوير أساليب عمل مجلس الأمن بما يسهم في تعزيز فاعليته وقدرته على الاطلاع بمسؤولياته وفقا لميثاق الأمم المتحدة.
Sure that the Council can fulfill its responsibilities in line with the UN Charter. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Saudi Arabia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Poland. You have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you for convening today's debate for your and Pakistan's stewardship of this file, and for Ms. Shamala Thompson, insightful briefing today, and we agree with the points that she mentioned there. A lot of useful remarks we could hear today, and I'll therefore limit myself to just a few points. There is no doubt that the Council should become more representative, inclusive, as well as efficient, especially now when, despite the efforts of many of its member states, the Security Council finds itself in a deadlock as the Russian aggression in Ukraine and other emerging and prolonged conflicts are often left without appropriate response. Similar deadlock affects the subsidiary bodies, we heard a lot of it today, and we join others in appeal to overcome this debacle as soon as possible. Some challenges can be overcome through actual application of the UN Charter provided solutions. One example might be preventing the abuse of veto. The veto right should be used in a responsible way to fulfill the purpose of the Security Council, which is to restrain aggression. Thus, there should not be a situation in which an aggressor, a member of the Security Council, can block a vote on the matter that is a consequence of its hostile actions. In the context of improving working methods of the Council, Poland commends the positive role of the E10 countries and their crucial input. On the topic of participation, we advocate for all Council members, including the elected ones, to contribute to the drafting processes. We call for further adjustments to promote a more equitable distribution of penholder responsibilities. As for the non-Council members, Poland is of the view that they should always be included in the discussions on subjects directly concerning them and be given an opportunity to voice their positions. Active involvement of non-Council UN members reinforces the legitimacy of this Council, but also safeguards the fundamental principles of multilateralism. Mr. President, another issue in the process of improving Council's practices is the need to focus more on cross-cutting topics. The nature of threats to peace and modern conflicts is increasingly complex, and the Council's work should reflect those changes. In our view, it should give a deliberate concern to protection of civilians in armed conflicts, as well as food security, nuclear safety, cybersecurity, risks stemming from the development of artificial intelligence, the WPS agenda, climate and security, and man-made disasters. All those issues should be part of Council's agenda. In conclusion, we need functional, effective, and inclusive Security Council. Against the backdrop of the ongoing debate on various aspects of the UN reform, it is crucial that the Council takes action to reaffirm its mandate and relevance and to reverse the decline in public confidence. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Poland for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Morocco.
Mr. President, at the outset, my delegation would like to thank Denmark for convening this important debate on the implementation of Security Council Note 507. I'd also like to thank Ms. Candia Thompson, Executive Director of Security Council Report, for her insightful and detailed briefing. Mr. President, the Security Council's working methods are critical to the effectiveness of the Security Council and core to its work. The manner the Security Council deliberates is inseparable from the substance of its decisions. Indeed, the Council's working methods are essential tools for strengthening the effectiveness and inclusivity of the Council, and ultimately for enabling it to discharge its mandate for the maintenance of international peace and security. With this understanding, my delegation would like to underline the following 3 points. First, as chair of the Peace Building Commission, Morocco welcomes the Council's growing recourse to the PBC's advice. We hope this practice will be further consolidated in full respect of the Commission's advisory mandate and of the cardinal principle of national ownership, a principle that will be at the heart of the PBC's ministerial meeting of 24th of September 2026. Second, we must preserve the institutional balance established by the Charter. Article 24 entrusts the Security Council with the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, acting on behalf of the entire UN membership. Article 25 gives effect to this responsibility by requiring member states to accept and carry out the Council's decision. Article 12, in turn, safeguards institutional coherence by providing that while the Council is exercising its functions in respect of a dispute or situation, the General Assembly shall refrain from making recommendations on that same matter. These provisions form a coherent architecture. Article 24 establishes the responsibility, Article 25 ensures authority, and Article 12 prevents duplication and fragmentation of decision-making. This is not an institutional formality. It is essential to enabling the United Nations to speak with one voice and to allow the Security Council to fulfill the primary responsibility that the Charter confers upon it. Third, Morocco firmly believes that the Security Council must make fuller and more effective use of the tools placed at its disposal by the Charter for the peaceful settlement of disputes. Prevention must remain at the heart of our collective action. dialogue, negotiations, and mediation are not merely instruments or tools of last resort. They are the core of international peace and security. Their timely use can prevent tensions, escalation, and crisis. This requires a Security Council that is more anticipatory than reactive, capable of identifying emergent tensions, engaging the parties at an early stage and encouraging them to resolve their differences through dialogue and peaceful means, in full accordance with the UN Charter. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, Morocco remains firmly committed to a multilateralism grounded in the Charter and in respect for international law, convinced that the authority of the Council's decision is nourished by the confidence inspired by the manner in which they are taken. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Morocco for the statement. The representative of Somalia has asked for the floor to make a statement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm taking the floor to respond to the remarks from the Israeli representative, who dared to label Somalia's legitimate defense of its sovereignty and its rejection of Israel's intention to relocate Palestinians to Somalia as conspiracy. Let me be clear. This is a present deflection from occupying power that has mastered the art of projecting its own sins into others. In the last 4 years, Israel has claimed the Security Council held around 100 meetings on it. Yet, in the same period, over 71,000 Palestinians have been killed and more than 171,000 wounded. That average is more than 700 deaths and over 1,700 injuries for every single one of those meetings. A toll that exposes the emptiness of Israel's complaints about diplomatic scrutiny. When 700 lives are lost per session, it's not the meetings that are excessive, but the massacres that are forced to document. The occupying power that demands the world respect its claim over Jerusalem and the Golan Heights while simultaneously trampling upon the territorial integrity of Somalia. It's a state that invokes international law when it suits, yet it dismisses without hesitation when confronting the rights of others, like the Palestinians in their self-determination and their sovereign state with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. And let us speak plainly about the Palestinians. While Israel accuses us of conspiracy, the entire world witnesses its daily violations in Gaza and the West Bank. The unlawful settlements, the crimes against humanity, the forced displacement of families, the siege that has starved an entire population, and the bombs falling on hospitals and schools. These are not allegations. These are documented atrocities. This is a systematic destruction of people and the relentless annexation of their land. And now, the very same regime that disregards dozens of UN resolutions on Palestine dares to lecture Somalia and the world on legality and morality. That, distinguished guests, is the pinnacle of hypocrisy. We respect the sovereignty of all states, Palestine included. We have consistently called for a just and lasting peace for the Palestinian people. Yet, Israel, the occupying power which denies Palestine its state, now presumes to create a new state out of Somali territory since it is isolated and needs endorsement for its bankrupted ideology. This is not diplomacy, but a provocation. Let me be perfectly clear. Somaliland is an inalienable part of Somalia. No foreign power, no unilateral declaration, and no self-serving strategic calculation will ever change that reality. Israel's so-called recognition is null, void, and worthless in the eyes of international law, the African Union, and the conscience of humanity. We call upon Israel to cease its reckless interference in the Horn of Africa. We call upon it to withdraw illegal recognition. But more than that, we call upon the entire world to see this pattern for what it is. The nation that respects no borders but its own, that recognizes no rights but its own, and that now seeks to export occupation doctrine to our own shores. Somalia will pursue every diplomatic, legal, and political avenue to defend our territory. And we will continue to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people until their rights, to self-determination is realized, just as we demand that ours be respected. To the international community, do not be deceived. Instead of recognizing other regions in other member states, recognize your neighbors, the Palestinian people's sovereign state. Recognize your violations and occupations of Syria's Golan Heights and Lebanon's southern. Recognize opinions of the ICJ. Recognize human rights. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.